Welcome, everyone, back to another edition of Prodly Did You Know? I am your co-host, Scott Teeple. Very excited to bring you yet another edition where we're going to be talking about scratch orgs and change types. So with me is Jen, as always, my co-host, but then also another edition where we're bringing Max in. Really excited to have him back to be able to share his overall knowledge. Don't think we need to stop and do any formal introductions, but Max, if you'd like to say a couple of words.
Well, thanks, Scott. Really delighted to be here again. And of course, I'm Max, CEO of Prodly, previously founder of Steelbrick, and I'm looking forward to another fun conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. So as I said, Prodly has scratch orgs and change types. So some of you may be out there like kind of scratching your head, pun intended. What is a scratch org and what is Salesforce's ideas around that? And then a change type. You've never heard of that. Well, that's really something that is Prodly and how we're going to extend that. And that's exactly what we're going to get into a little bit today. So Prodly does more than just move complex data. Hopefully you're starting to get the trend here with Prodly Did You Know? But why should you trust Prodly for more than just that data piece that you know and love us for? But Max, let's get into a little bit of this conversation about Salesforce's vision and what is a scratch org.
Yeah, so Scratch.org is sort of the next generation of the Salesforce, or part of the Salesforce's vision for the next generation Salesforce developer experience, right? That's what SFDX stands for, by the way. It's right, Salesforce Developer Experience. It's actually built on their new kind of infrastructure database architecture, Sayonara, which is fun fact is Sayonara is goodbye in Japanese, as in goodbye to Oracle, which is what Salesforce had originally been built on, and it's just really fast. Sort of uses a really different database architecture, and that's what enables these scratch orgs to spin up really quickly. So that's part of it, like performance, but also I think just the vision around scratch orgs and, kind of aligning more closely with what your sort of normal developer experience would be outside of Salesforce, where, you have your local workstation, right, that you write code on and you pull source code from repository, and then, you just kind of have your local like server running the web app. Let's say that you're developing, you make some changes, right? You commit those changes, and then you can blow out that whole local directory and replace it with something else. But the point is, it's sort of like temporary and transient while you're making changes, right? So that's the same paradigm is behind the scratch orgs to kind of drive that source-driven development paradigm that Salesforce is trying to introduce into Salesforce development.
Perfect. So then what do we understand about Salesforce's vision and how organizations should be utilizing them within their day-to-day business operations?
Well, with that said, I think it's really kind of goes hand in hand with this transition to a source-driven development paradigm as opposed to org-driven development paradigm, right? Where all your Salesforce config is really driven from a source control repository, a Git-based repository, or it doesn't have to be Git, but that's sort of the prevailing standard in the market right now. But the point is, all the config is actually mastered, not in Salesforce org, production org, but it's mastered in a Git repository, a source control repository, and then you're sort of deploying into orgs to match the repository. And obviously, the big advantage of that is if something should go wrong, God forbid, either there is some kind of disaster or, kind of an accidental, overwriting of a change, or maybe you deploy the change that happened to break something and you need to get the system back up quickly, then you can do what's called a rollback or restore from the source control repository and bring your org back online. If you are on the source-driven development paradigm, that's really harder to do, right? Because then you kind of have to go look for an org that has that doesn't have the change that broke it, and which is a lot more difficult and a lot more time consuming, and therefore increases your downtime.
Yeah. So I guess let's introduce change type here a little bit. I know I said it like a couple of seconds ago. What is Prodly's vision for these scratch orgs that Salesforce allows, and then what's a change type?
Yeah, so they're kind of different but related concepts, and sort of one builds on the other. Right? So when we say Prodly has scratch orgs, what we mean is not that we have our own version of scratch orgs. What we mean is we support scratch org-based development. And why? What does that mean? Well, scratch orgs are sort of the next generation architecture. They're really fast, but one of the big problems with them is they're sort of really bare, right? Like a scratch org in its purest form is just an org. There's nothing in it at all. A sandbox at least has the metadata, right? A full copy of the metadata from whatever environment is being spun from. Scratch org doesn't even have that. That's one problem. Two is there really is no UI to create a scratch org unlike a sandbox, right? And with a sandbox, you go to setup and you templates and it's a GUI to spin up a sandbox. With scratch org. You would have to use CLI, command line interface, part of this FTX, right, to create those sort of different settings that drive it. So not an experience that lends itself to a citizen developer type of workflow. So the first bit of functionality that we have is a UI to create a scratch, right, that a citizen developer, a non-developer can use. And we're not just talking about creating a scratch org, we're also talking about, right, seeding it with, of course, data, which is our bread and butter, but also metadata in this case. And now I will point out that Salesforce is continuing to work on this, has made a lot of progress in sort of supporting scratch org development and making it a lot easier, right? There's now these snapshots which you can kind of like configure. It's basically a snapshot of an org with there's no data in it, but just metadata, right? So at least that part is easier. But I'm pretty sure you still have to use the command line interface to spin it up. So we're putting a UI on just the process of creating a scratch org, which makes it accessible to less technical users. So that's one feature in Prodly. That's a big value add. Change types is really something different, and it's related, but it kind of builds on this concept of a scratch org and making it easy to spin up dev environments. And it's, I would say, at a higher level abstraction. So it's not really specific to scratch orgs, but it's really about making dev environment creation faster and easier and more accessible to less technical users, one, and two, abstracting away the complexities of such a process. So change types is really, and the reason it's called change types is sort of built around this concept like, hey, what kind of change are you making, right? Are you making a change to flows in Sales Cloud? Are you making a change to your CPQ implementation? Or maybe even more specifically, is it a change to a product catalog, or is it a change to the templates, right? Like the granularity of a change and what kind of, how you want to structure these changes is up to you. But the vision behind it is like, hey, you define what these changes are for you. And when I say you, meaning an admin or, an architect, somebody who understands the nuances of the data model and the metadata that's involved in a particular kind of change. And they define these change types once, right? And as part of that definition, they specify what kind of environment does it need to be created in. So is it a scratch org? Maybe it's a sandbox. If it's a long-running change, right? Perhaps it makes more sense to do it in the sandbox, because one of the features of scratch orgs is they're transient, right? They You specify the duration of a scratch org, but I believe the most it can go on is 30 days. So if you have a long running project, for example, like, in the RP implementation, and you need to have a sandbox, that probably doesn't work for you, right? Because, that type of project is most certainly going to go on for longer than 30 days. So as part of change type definition, you'd specify what kind of development environment you want to do it in, scratch org, sandbox, right? Pro, dev pro, partial, whatever. You specify the kind of metadata that you want to have in there. If it's a scratch org, right? Because sandboxes will have all of it anyway. But you can specify the metadata for the scratch org. Or even if it's a sandbox, you may say, hey, like, it gets spun up from production, but I actually want to overlay certain kinds of metadata from a different environment or from a version control repository, let's say, right? So there's also some nuance, and you can do that. And then the last piece is you specify what kind of data you need for that change, right? And if it's CPQ product catalog change, well, yeah, you need products, you need product options, right? Product rules, price rules, etc. If you're making changes to the standard sales cloud, then maybe you're tweaking the lead to opportunity conversion mappings. Well, you probably don't need your products and product options, right? You just want to have a sampling of accounts and leads and opportunities and contacts that you can test that out, right? Um, and then as a user, right? And by user, we mean whoever it is that's making the changes, you really don't know about any of it, right? You don't need to know about what you need to have in your development environment and how it's set up. All you do is you just pick a change type that applies to you and click go. Or better yet, you don't even do that. The change type was already assigned to the change request or a work item that you're working on. And by the time you come into work um, in the morning or whenever you come into work, a fully configured, fully functional, dedicated dev environment is already spun up and ready for you just for that work item with everything you need and nothing.
Yeah, and then that's really exciting, especially when you think about not just having it available, but also seeded with production data. So you know that developers will be working in as close to production as possible. So you're not bringing in other stuff, other factors, other variables that could cause when you
That's
go
right.
to
You're isolating exactly, and that's obviously the best practice, right? Is to having a fully isolated dev environment just for that work item or just that work stream. Again, whatever that granularity is up to you. But exactly right. It's fully isolated, and it has everything that you need from both metadata and data perspective. And it doesn't have to come from just production, right? It could be a composite of multiple sources, right,
yeah,
across metadata and data.
yeah, and not to mention also install packages too, which is which is really really exciting. So, but yeah, Jen. So as you think about Prodly, and our, I guess, UI piece of it, right? Like what would you expect, right? The basics of a Scratch tool. Talk us through a little bit of these features that you would find with using Prodly for the creation.
Yeah, so this slide here does list each of those pieces individually. But essentially, these are the basics of what you'll need if you need a scratch org tool. So obviously, being able to create a scratch org is first and foremost. And we kind of talked a little bit about the configuration piece as well, being able to configure that org how you need it. Authentication and access, of course, being able to authenticate that environment, connect it, to run other deployments, and then monitoring who has access to it, who can access it. Environment management, of course. Source tracking version control, which Max also touched on a little bit earlier, but being able to, connect to a VC repository and continue your development through your pipeline. Metadata data deployments, right? We're talking kind of populating that metadata in the org upon creation, and then of course also preceding it. So you don't even need to really run a post-seeding deployment. Custom scripts, automation, being able to go on automate that. and then of course a UI, which is kind of what we're going to be showing in the demo. So we'll be able to walk through that in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I really love about this, right, and Max, you talked about the CLI and getting it done. This is none of what you get in that, right? Like just getting it created and then what, right? How do you then go and start applying it? How do you start using it? And Prodly is really kind of taking care of all of this, right? With all the things that you already know and love about us. When you think about authentication, access, environment management, all that kind of just all gets automatically is the word I love to use here, kind of behind the scenes, kind of sets it up for you. So it's really awesome.
Yeah, and I think a really important point here is like in our ultimate vision, right? You actually are kind of using change types, programmatically, right, through the CLI or through the API, right? The ideal state is that the end user, the developer, the admin, whoever is making changes, doesn't even see change types, right? It's something that is sort of like it's the plumbing behind the scenes that, all they really know is they get assigned a work item, a change request to work on. And as part of that assignment, right, automatically, everything just works and it just gets set up. So it's kind of like the Apple value proposition, right? It just works.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So Jen, you got a couple of questions here you wanted to go through with Max?
Yeah. So normally, when we do showcase, our Scratchworks change types to our customers, some questions do come up. So we want to take a moment to highlight those here. So these are questions that our customers have asked in the past. So why Scratchworks over sandboxes? Why are they recommended?
Yeah. So, again, big caveat here is that I wouldn't say that Scratchworks are always should be used over sandboxes, right? As I pointed out, there are some use cases where sandboxes actually make more sense. In fact, are the only choice that makes sense. But why Scratchworks, I would say, are recommended for most use cases is, again, it's around, it's really about the speed, frankly, right? As you and maybe most of our listeners know, sandboxes can take a while to create, right? It could be anywhere from several hours to sometimes days, and we've even seen a week-long sandbox creation turnaround time, right? And this is because the sandboxes, they get put in the queue, and depending on how busy the instance is or how much data is getting copied, right? Not just by you, but by other tenants in the pod in the queue before you, right? It can really take a long time. And because Scratchworks are using that new database architecture that I talked about, right? They are much, much faster. We're talking on the order of, minutes, right? Ideally seconds if it's kind of a vanilla Scratch work, right? I was like, installing the managed packages takes probably the most amount of time, and that could take a little while. And depending on how many of those you have in your org, right, that could extend the time. But they're orders of magnitude faster than Sandbox. And so why do you need that speed? Well, it goes back to this best practice of creating dev environments that are fully isolating your particular work stream or even individual work item. And so if you want to follow that best practice, then you need to create a lot of dev environments, right? And so that's where the performance is coming into picture, right? If you're creating a lot of development environments, then you can't be waiting for days and weeks, right, for them to be created.
Okay. And just to kind of reiterate, so the best practices, at least Salesforce recommended best practices, are to have individual work items being worked on in individual Scratchwork environments. Is that correct?
I think it's, yeah, yes, and it really has to do with, so again, let's kind of unpack like why that is, right? So Scratchworks, and maybe this is your kind of next question, right, that's on the slide is, Scratchworks itself, like, don't have many benefits, right? It's just an org, right? At the end of the day, it's the end result is kind of the same, right? You're making changes into an org in the dev org, where you can test them out and then queue them for promotion to the next org in your pipeline. So But then kind of working backwards from that is, right, like if you are following the best practice, so creating like this feature branches and spinning up separate orgs for your separate work streams or even separate work items, then you need to spin up these orgs much more frequently, and you need it to be done faster. So then the question is, well, why do I want to isolate my work, and why do I want to create a separate dev environment for every work stream, work item, whatever? Well, this goes this into the downstream impact of not doing that, which is the less segregation you have, the more you're piling into a shared development environment like a full copy sandbox or even partial sandbox, the more concurrent, separate work streams, work items are getting worked on by the more developers in that org, the higher the likelihood, the higher are the chances of you running into merge conflicts and overriding each other's changes. Right? So that's really kind of like when you think about scaling, right? That's really the issue, right? As you scale, you're going to have more cooks in the kitchen. You're going to work on more things at the same time. You're going to have more concurrent work streams. So if you don't spin up more environments and isolate them more, you're going to have problems downstream with merges and things getting overwritten and such.
Right. So to kind of sum that up, it's not the scratch org itself, more the process that you build around it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Amazing. So the next question, I know we kind of touched on this a bit. How can if my team is growing, how can scratch orgs benefit my organization to save me time and money? We definitely talked a little bit about the time, but how about the money aspect? How could using this scratch orgs in your process kind of save your team time and money in the long run?
Well, I'll start by saying that time is money, right? So just by saving time, you are saving money. Other than that, you can probably optimize your sandbox spend in some ways, right? So kind of the brute force way of doing this, and it's not just about scratch orgs. This is really more around like sandbox management and data seeding specifically. The brute force approach is just to like buy more full copy sandboxes, which are obviously, very expensive, or even partial sandboxes, which also cost money. So by leveraging Dev Pro, and Scratch orgs, which are free, right, you are able to optimize your spend. And I'm not saying you should not have a full copy sandbox or even multiple full copy sandboxes, right, depending on the complexity of your pipeline and your process. But you don't want those to be taken up, consumed by your dev environments, right? Those should be your UAT, your staging, something much, much later in the pipeline.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then the last question we have is, are there any considerations before getting started with change types?
Well, the biggest ask probably is for you to think through what are the kind of changes that you're making and what do those changes need from both metadata and data perspectives, and where should that metadata and data come from, right? But once you work through that, creating them is pretty simple. It's a WYSIWYG experience and Prodly to create these change types, and using them is even simpler, right? It's really just picking the right change type and hitting a go button, and please reach out if you want to kind of go the next step and automate the process and hook it up to your work management system. And we do have APIs available and CLI plugins available that allow you to do these things programmatically, not to create them, but to use them.
Absolutely. And I think from a kind of a technical side from Prodly, as far as considerations, I think it's pretty much limited to you will need to have Prodly installed in your production org, as well as having DevHub enabled and an org shape defined. Is that correct?
Not exactly. Everything is correct except for the first part. You don't need to have Prodly installed in your production org, right? That's the beauty of our architecture. You can have Prodly installed in any org. Right? But yeah, you do need org shapes set up on your dev environment hub enabled in your production org. But probably doesn't need to be installed in the production org. You can drive this process from any org. In fact, the best practice is to have a separate tooling org, the DevOps org, where you run Prodly, and Prodly just connects to all of your to all the environments in your pipeline.
Excellent. Thank you, Max.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I guess it's now time, Jen. If you want to show up your screen here, we'll do a quick little demo.
Okay. So to get started with our demo today, I did want to walk through some of those setup steps. So of course, we mentioned having DevHub enabled in the org that you want to build this off of. Oh, here we go. So to enable DevHub, you do need to come into Salesforce Setup and then just search for DevHub. Mine is already enabled, so you don't see the option to enable it. Once it's enabled, I believe it cannot be disabled after that. So just be sure you want to enable DevHub before enabling it. And then from there, you can also come and search for Scratch orgs, which will allow us to specify an org shape. So you will need to specify an org shape here, or rather an org ID. This org ID, you're essentially authorizing the org that you enter here to build Scratch orgs off of this production org that you're setting it up in. And just note, this does have to be the 15-character org ID, not the 18-digit. So those are really just the pre-setup steps. And then once you have set that up, that's when you'll be able to create a Scratch org from our UI. So you'll see the Create Scratch button from the Environments page. Now, when you come in here, it's really straightforward, super simple. Wizard walks you through what you need to do. You give your Scratch org some type of name, something that means something to you. And then you can choose the source, of course, that you want to build the org off of. Back to the duration of the org that we mentioned earlier, you can set a custom duration if you'd like, or you can just go with 7 or 30 days. The max, I believe, is 30. From there, you can also pick and choose which packages you want to pre-install in that org. You can unselect them all and just go in and pick and choose the ones you actually want to deploy, or rather install. And then you can actually drag and drop them too. If there's a specific order that you want them to be installed in, or they need to be installed in, just be sure to drag and drop in the order you need. For the metadata piece, this is going to be working off of our metadata filters, which if you are already deploying metadata with Prodly, you're probably already familiar with these filters. We do give you some out of the box, but you can always create your own. So you'll need to tell us what components you want us to include in there using a filter. Of course, you also have the ability to roll that back if some of the metadata fails. So we can you can prevent us from going on to create the org if some of your metadata fails. And then, of course, the data piece to seed your org. You're going to choose either a data set or deployment plan from the list here, one that you're already using probably with Prodly. And you also have the option to prevent the data piece if the metadata piece fails. So these would be the settings to create the org, and then you just go ahead and create the Scratch org when you're ready. Once you hit Create Scratch org, this will spin up a Scratch org environment, which you will see appear here. So you'll see it will appear like any other environment. It will be labeled with the Scratch org, of course. And then when you click into that org, you can access the org through the link if you're the one that set it up. And you can also see when that org is set to expire. So this is how you would spin up a single Scratch org. Now, when we're talking change types are really allowing us to create kind of a template of that Scratch org and to be able to quickly spin them up whenever you need them. So when you want to work off of a change type, you can just come in here and choose your change type. But first, you need to create the change type. So you can hop to the page from here. I've already opened it up here. So change type, again, same, very similar UI to what we were just seeing with the Scratch org, pretty much the exact same thing. Just giving us the name, the source that you want to build it off of, duration, packages, metadata, and data. And then once you have your change type, like here, for example, I have my CPQ change type. I can also edit this if I ever need to, if I want to make changes to it. But you see I have some of those, like I have advanced approvals, billing, CPQ in here, got my all major metadata types, and my full CPQ deployment plan to go in there and fully push my CPQ config. So I'm going to build a Scratch org off of this change type. So I'll come in and choose my change type. Of course, I have a preview of what's in that change type to make sure that I'm choosing the correct change type. And then I'll come in here and give this a name, and we will just hit create. And in just a moment, you'll see the environment card being created. The user who creates it will also be receiving emails throughout the creation process, so you know where the process is at. Once the packages start getting installed, you'll be updated when they're successfully installed. If there's any issues, you'll receive an email as well. And then once you have your org, like I said, it's just like any other org in your environments page. You can run deployments to and from it. You can also, of course, go and enable version control in it as well if you need to. I think that's all I got for today.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Jen. That was a good visibility into Prodly and how it can work. And again, I think it's just the beginning stages of the broader process of as Max talked about, setting up what the future can be for the new for your new process and how to fully take advantage of using these. So, all right. Well, what's next? Well, as always, as your customer success manager, Jen and I, please don't hesitate to reach out if you want more information. Of course, you already trust us for your complex data. Why not trust us for a whole lot more? And if you're viewing this as a prospect or wanting more information, you can reach out to me as well. We'll get you in touch and maybe get you a demo not only of the change types, but as the whole product as a whole. So. And we have many of these videos that are already on our website. So hopefully take a look at the rest of those videos. And there'll be more coming in the future. So, and maybe we'll bring Max back on for a couple of more. So appreciate your time. And thanks, Max, for the insights. And Jen, as always, until next time, we'll see you then.
Thank you.